but I promise I will. First one is from Khrushchev. But people don't really talk about Khrushchev in the USSR when they talk about Soviet, when they talk about social media, but I understand that all makes sense. And this is what Khrushchev said when the Communist Party came up to him in the Soviet Union saying, we want you out of here. And I don't know if you guys can see the slide in DC, but it says, could anyone have dreams of telling Stalin that he couldn't suit us anymore, and suggesting that he retire? Not even a left spot left remained where we had been standing. Now everything is different, the fear is gone, and we can talk to equals. That is my contribution. So that's the first quote, and then we'll go to the next slide. There's going to be a quote from Carl Sagan, which I don't know how young your audience is right now, but they probably haven't heard of him. He's a super interesting astronomer and astrophysicist, and he had a great TEDx show, and he recalled a story and said, a scientific colleague tells me about a recent trip to New Guinea Highlands where she visited a Stone Age culture, hardly contacted by Western civilization. They were ignorant of wristwatches, soft drinks, and frozen food, but they knew about Apollo 11. They knew that humans should walk on the moon. They knew the names of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. They wanted to know who was visiting the moon these days. Then, with those two, now we are we can delve into the actual discussion. So, next slide. And I have that again as a social make sense. So if you leave now, they will not make sense to you, but there's still a great growth. So back in 2009, something startling happened. On my Twitter stream, people kept altering their Twitter profiles, and they had this greenish tint to them. And over the next couple of hours, an influx of tweets came in describing the contested elections in Iran. And these went out throughout the day. Iranian people felt like the election was rigged, and they went on Twitter to spread the word. And it was the first time that Twitter actually played a prominent role in any overseas political struggle. So it's pretty much like a testing time for them. And it was really interesting that it happened in Iran because it was a crucial case study. Because they had a corrupted government, they still had unrestricted access to the internet. That's pretty much widespread. So it's a very interesting case study. And then CNN and the other news outlets actually, they actually covered the events, but they were essentially like over a day late doing them. So it showed how much quicker Twitter and then events spread through YouTube can be. It pretty much marked the new stage and how we perceive and consume media. So I want to take a little break. Actually, in the teleconference, I can see other locations. I'm seeing San Francisco right now. And there's Crystal smiling. I don't know if you guys can see in DC. There's a girl texting in the middle of my conversation. So I hope you're writing a response letter. So I hope whatever response you have, you send it to me on Twitter and you can start having around. So I just want to sort of go back and just give a little bit of history about how media has changed and how Twitter is completely shaping the way we interact. She put down her phone. I can't hear what she's saying, but so if we go back to the 1950s and 60s, television was one of the primary sources of information for people about the world, and so was newspapers. But most of the sources that the television and people from the news outlets got were directly given from the government. So, things about the Korean War, for example, those were all provided by the government. And people generally believed what they heard and saw. Now, this tide of trust and the love affair between government and the media drastically changed during the Watergate scandal, which the Washington Post wrote about President breaking. This was during the Vietnam War. Governmental affairs more, and important military documents such as like Pentagon Papers were released. At this stage, the media did not really depend on the government for information. It was finding its own source. It was delving into the government. Essentially, the media at this stage were like in the teenager stage, when a child realizes their parent is not always right. And the next stage happened essentially when the Gulf War broke out. It's like in the 80s. Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then CNN was there in Baghdad, broadcasting reports live. And when the U.S. forces reached Baghdad, George H.W. Bush actually watched CNN live to know what the military was doing, because all of the military intel was actually delayed. So, so what actually happened was the government was now relying on the media for information, so the important next stage. And the media would express like public concerns, the opinion polls, and even viewers would call into programs. So it's a way for people to get to interact with government through like a middleman. When you reach a stage of government would need to respond to this media versus the other way around. It's almost as if the media reached like an adult stage. It's giving life advice to the very people that established them. And if you hit the next slide. Cool. It's actually in Libya, and right before they do their daily prayer, there's two people with laptops and they're updating their Twitter account. So it's interesting how we have an Islamic traditional society and they're being influenced by Western empires such as Twitter and Facebook. Like when Twitter first launched, like only a few people saw the global implications that it would have. Many brushed it off as a waste of time and space, myself among them, and felt that important matters could rather be blogged and wrote about in the long form, sort of like how traditional media has done it. But what transpired is completely different. Twitter's 140 character limit enabled people to send live unedited field reports. So before like a newswire like this, Associated Press or like Reuters wanted to break the story, they would need to write an article, have proofread it, send it off to the editor, and then that's sent to a newswire, and then that newswire needs to be picked up in the New York Times and needs to be published. This probably took a day. Versus a tweet, which basically is there in milliseconds. Like if I refresh my Twitter account, I get many tweets in my timeline. And this medium has both positive and negative effects, and I'll start with the positive ones. Any person with internet access can report any injustice over the world, and they can quickly upload a YouTube video from their mobile devices. So the mobile phone essentially is now a more important weapon than like in 1847. Not in terms of like physical power, but they'll test this out. But in the long term, like in the so-called like Arab Spring, like with the northern African states and the middle eastern states, fighting for democracy. People are actually going on the streets with their iPhones and, in some cases even iPads and Android phones, and they're recording all the injustices that are happening. For example, on Reddit, there's a video that got like 2,000 upvotes, and there's someone out of an apartment with them in Egypt was recording governmental vehicles running over protesters. And then this this alarmed the U.S., this triggered a press conference. This got like Clinton to talk about Mubarak needs to step down, etc., etc. And that really wouldn't have happened if that person didn't have internet access, and if that person did not have the mobile phone and YouTube around them. And the same thing happened with shooting squads in Syria and this general unrest in Yemen. And the consequences of these were hugely important. It's basically like live journalism in a free market form. No one is doing it for the money, but just to spread the word. Sort of like how Banksy approaches art. He's not being paid for it. He just goes out and does it. But then of course it also has negative effects. In that every tweet and every situation has inherent biases, and there's a general lack of understanding of global politics when you're tweeting stuff out. So, I don't know how much you guys know about this, but when WikiLeaks leaked all those government documents that had secret cables, they were released in a completely raw format. So they just basically picked up the file from the government and just released it. And no journalism trained editor went through the document, so the entirety of the thing was released. You just downloaded in PDF form. And then of course they revealed some illicit activities. But they also unintentionally released a lot of secret agent names that are out in the field. So it was secret agents in Syria or China or whatever, and the real names were leaked and then they ended up being killed. And the U.S. lost significant political leverage from places like North Korea. So many don't really understand the information willingly mirrored the documents and downloaded them. So that's sort of the dark side of the internet, where you can just get any document turned online. Versus how it used to be back in the day with something like the leaking of the Pentagon Papers or Watergate, where all those documents would pass on to journalists who could then make executive decisions about what's safe to release and what's not. It basically gave reports of facts about endangering lives. It's an interesting line because there should be transparency in government, but as a reasonable measure. And that sort of follows the first quote that I showed. Essentially, Twitter allows everyone on the planet to like talk as equals without any censorship, replacing their control over content with the mass media with an equal platform. So if we hit up the next slide, then, awesome. Okay, so that's, I don't know how much you guys watch CNN, but they've been on a Twitter craze lately. Pretty much if you're on Twitter, you can be on CNN. That's probably how they're phrasing letter teams building a Twitter robot. So, now most of TV media, as I said, CNN, utilize Twitter and Facebook, and when the British court, they ordered super injections a while ago, and that bans the media from talking about certain things. It's supposed to be for national security, but they just ordered it for this football player for some reason, like for the safety over his family or something, because he like had like a sex scandal, but that actually ended up being leaked onto Twitter. So Twitter basically uncensors the media. So it's very interesting how that works out. And then, CNN's like laughing at this whole Twitter thing. Like during the Iranian elections, they didn't have any reporters on the floor. So it's really hard to get into Iran if you're a reporter. And if you're into Iran as a reporter, they probably just throw you in jail. So it's really hard to get reporting out of there. So they actually relied on Twitter and YouTube as like primary citations for their sources. So, the media now relies on social media, while the government relies on both. In this stage, like, the government has two avenues for gauging public interest. We've seen this with like Barack Obama having a Twitter account, and the White House actually has a White House podcast. It's actually really interesting. But then it's also important to note that like, proper journalism, like New York Times, New Yorker, Slate, still has a really prominent role. Like, for example, when the original WikiLeaks documents were leaked with the military, they were actually the ones who deciphered all of the codes. So the New York Times actually employs like former members of the armed forces, and they could actually paint a picture of the significance of the documents. So in this role, like the internet plays an important role in getting the information out there and breaking the news, while the journalists actually interpret it. So, and then I read about this every single day. There's like newspapers going bankrupt, newspapers are worried about that. Like New York Times now has a pay model, like you can sort of premium model or something, and they're putting out their content just being put out there, and they're getting essentially nothing back. That's exactly the wrong way to look at it. So if we head up to the next slide. So this is a little project I'm working on called Skimly, and what it does is that I can send an article to like a group of friends or like a friend. So like, let's say I had like a tech friend, like say like Daniel, John, and Bob or whatever, and I can send an Engadget article to all of them immediately, and it uses Instapaper's API. So it basically downloads the article and it strips it of any ads and it strips it of any like, nuances. So it just shows up the content of the article. So this got me thinking that like, more and more people consume articles this way, like through iPhones, through iPads, through RSS readers, through Instapaper readability, what have you. Like newspapers now are more of like a content provider. Like they almost have like APIs at this point. They're not something that you just you hold in your hand. Now it's like they have different avenues for the content. So that's an interesting way because they still need to make money, but people are wanting to consume this content. So it's very interesting that they're gonna go across. So another interesting thing is that so like Syria, Egypt, and Yemen, they all tried cutting off the internet because the news is getting out there by Twitter, news is getting out there by YouTube, and it seems like the dictators there and the fascist leaders are more worried about cutting off internet access than they are actually about like people like storming the accounts, because it's mighty impressive to have 100 rebel soldiers storming your accounts, but it's also kind of bad when you have the entire world against you, putting economic sanctions and having like the U.S. like bomb your accounts. So that's why that sort of comes back to the Carl Sagan quote, which is it's essential to maintain a free neutral internet. To ensure that content isn't censored and important events can be documented, like as I said about the Carl Sagan quote, like it's a shame we lost marine landings, and it'd be an equal shame to lose this golden age of the internet. So we just hit that second slide. So that's pretty much it. So if you guys have any questions, or feel free to hit me up, or you can ask them now, I think, because I think I can hear you guys.
So yeah, we can hear you and you should be able to hear us, but we actually have to... You can hear me?
I can hear your majestic voice through the speakerphone, yes.
Majestic, thank you. But so we're actually going to move on to the very last video that we're going to play. But let's all give out a round of applause.